Hello, my name is Lowell, pronouns he, him, and what follows is a edited seminar we did a couple of years ago on running mystery TTRPGs. It's a lot of me talking at the beginning, and then it's followed by some Q&A at the end. In the show notes, I also have links to some pieces that I reference in there, as well as a link to the outline of the talk that I did. So I hope you find this useful. This is one among many talking TTRPG seminars that we have done in the community. Some of them are workshops, some of them are more talks like this, but I hope you find it useful. Hello, and welcome to this next talk about running tabletop RPG mysteries. My name is Lowell, pronouns he, him. What we're going to be doing today is me talking for a while. I'm working from an outline. We'll see how much I get through of that outline, but definitely taking at least the last half hour or back half to answer questions from people, or if they have examples or things they want to give as insider input into this, they're more than welcome to. So I love running mysteries, in part because I am terrible at them. Like, I will read mystery novels and I will be shocked at the end. I will watch Agatha Christie stories and watch procedurals, and Sherry will have figured it out long before I do. I am very bad at them. So one of the pleasures of running mysteries is that I already know the answer and I don't have to work it out. And I really, really love it for that. So in terms of what I'm talking about, mysteries are an important question, an issue that's out there that the players have to dig into and find out about, and often by answering sub-questions. Right now, we're focused on, in terms of my talk, about mysteries as the central problem. But as we may get to a little bit later, there are often mysteries sort of hidden in the background, things that pop up that occur as processes throughout an ordinary other game. The most common structure that we see for the classic mystery TTRPG scenario is there is an incident, there is a crime that happens, and the players go to investigate that. And by investigating that, they realize that there is a bigger picture problem. There is a bigger picture question that is going on. That's the classic Call of Cthulhu structure, but it's the classic structure for all of the kinds of stories, or at least many of them, that we'll see. Within that, I want to talk about there being three kinds of approaches based on our system, based on our game, based on our play approach. The first of these is the set mystery. We have an established solution, and there's typically a chain of process that we're going to work through. Call of Cthulhu works this way. Trail of Cthulhu, a lot of the classic investigation mystery stories work with it. It means we planned out the stages. It's not necessarily linear, but we've kind of worked things out and gotten those ahead of time and have a set endpoint. The second are improv or semi-improv games, meaning that maybe we put some ideas before the players, some materials, and let them go at it, and we'll figure out, where we need to go, what the crime is we're following up on, what we're looking into. The Armitage Files from Trail of Cthulhu works this way. They have a player sort of facing handout, these different letters, and based on what the players investigate, the mystery sort of changes. But there's also semi-improv games like the Mystery Landscape of Tales from the Loop, which is a bunch of different hooks and a bunch of different things that are put out there for the players. And the players can choose what they want to investigate, choose what they want to look into. It's a big, broad set of rumors and hooks. The third kind, as we've seen in recent years, is really the Brindlewood approach. And this is a very different approach than we've had before. That is a collaborative approach. And it is, in a way, improv based on details. Now, it may look kind of loosey-goosey when you think about it. Oh, we're going to figure out the answer at the end. We're going to do this theorize move at the end. But in fact, there's a lot of legwork that's done with those Brindlewood Bay mysteries and the between, in terms of setting up the characters and setting up the clues and figuring things out. There is a lot of legwork. What I'm going to talk about, at least at the start here, are mysteries where we're doing the planning, mysteries where we've taken the time to plot out what's going to happen. We're starting with an idea of an incident versus a big problem, and we're working out how the players get from A to Z. So I want to break this kind of up into 3 stages. One is kind of like, how do we come up with a mystery? The next one is, how do we plan out that mystery? And the last one of that is, how do we run a mystery at the table? So when I'm thinking about a mystery story, I come at it from one of 2 ways. Either I've come up with an idea, an incident, something that sounds cool to me, or I've got an end goal, like an end problem. In the first case, with the incident, I start with that and then I work forward. In the other case, I start with the big picture and then work backwards. I'll give you 2 concrete examples of this. I ran Dresden Files Accelerated. And the idea I had was that in the end, the big question, the big problem was that someone was stealing a hell and was building a new Chinese hell in America. That's my big concept there. And the thing then was, okay, how do I get to there? Where do I start with? I want some kind of inciting murder or supernatural happening that gets to that. But I started from sort of the end. The other approach with this is, I had, with a game called Kuro, which is a sort of a Japanese cyber horror game, I had the idea of a person with a dermal tattoo that was being used to summon a killer. Essentially, someone was hacking that tattoo to do that. And that's kind of with that sort of incident of this person being killed by a magical tattoo, and then working with, okay, why were they killed? What happened there? What went on? So there are 2 approaches that I take with that. One of the things about doing it from the inciting incident, like the big scene, is you can really think about it in terms of the set piece. This is what I want to have happen. This is what I want to see. This is the tone that I want to put on the table right away. And it also means that you can start to visualize how the PCs are going to enter into the scene, enter into the story there. If we're coming at it from the big picture, the big problem approach to things, you can start from thinking about what the showdown is going to look like. Like when they fight the big bad, when they bring down the big criminal, what do you suppose that scene is going to look like? And once you start thinking about the details of that, you can start going, okay, what are the possible ways that we arrive at that place? Like, what would be the steps for us to get there? Now, one of the things about mysteries is that we are focusing sort of on crimes and criminals and things, but mysteries can also be about problem solving. They can be about an issue being put out there, a problem being solved. It's sort of the same thing, but we're trying to come up with an answer to a problem. I like to think about it this way because there are some people who do not like mysteries in their TTRPG games. We will come back to this later. If you know Rich Rogers, who I love and adore, and is a good friend of mine, but he despises mysteries. He despises mysteries. So what I tend to do when I run for him is I tend to hide the mysteries. I make them into problems that have to get solved, steps that have to be taken. I try to make it a little bit more palatable to him. And it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. But that's an issue that he and I have together. In terms of thinking about picturing mysteries in terms of noir or picturing CSI or any of those kinds of things, that's where we're drawing our inspiration from. I do want to say that most mystery stories are not great models for what we're doing as GMs when we're running. They can be inspirational, but most mystery stories are focused on an audience. They're trying to hide things from an audience, and they're trying to reveal things. They're trying to keep those things for the last minute. As GMs, we are focused on the detective. We are playing to them, and we want to keep them in the loop. We want to keep them going along. We want to draw them forward rather than hiding everything until the end. So Agatha Christie stories are great, but they are very much about hiding the ball until the end, or burying the details in a mass of other information. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to, in some ways, do the opposite of that. Good models, though, from existing media, I would recommend. Columbo, as archaic as it may be now, is a great model because we do get to see the process of figuring out the crime from the outside. We already know what the crime is. We have to work our way backwards. I would also say that a lot of, especially modern Doctor Who, is a great model for mystery stories. They are often pretty direct. They're pretty clear. They explain things in an easy set of steps, but they're also mysteries that often involve an ensemble. It isn't just one detective. It's a set of detectives trying to put together the pieces to figure something out. In the same way, I'd say a really good one episode Star Trek show, they're often, here's a problem, here's a mystery, different people are trying to solve it. There may be a B plot, but you can see how different clues get doled out for different people, how different approaches work. So I would say that those are decent models. So you think about a mystery, kind of come up with a hook, come up with a plot. You kind of know what you want to do. You probably have a game or a system you're thinking about that you want to work in. I want to talk about the planning process. I have in recent years moved away from doing a lot of prep. I think that's part of what PBTA and other rules like games have allowed us to do, is to be more improvisational, to move away from that. But I come from a very strong trad background. I'm way too old. And, I come from the era of Dungeons and Dragons, first edition. I come from Rollmaster. I come from Champions, all these old games. And a lot of them that are very much about prep and writing out details and things like that. But I've moved away from that. I will say, though, that I still enjoy doing it from time to time. In recent years, I've run some quarterlies of Night's Black Agents and Delta Green, and I've enjoyed the process of building those things up, especially with those more trad games. But even then, one of my goals is to not overdo it, is to keep that prep as light as I can. There's a thing that I say about painting miniatures, which is I don't paint where you can't see. If I put paint on the figure, I want you to see it. If it's like the undercoating or whatever, I don't care about that. I want to just give you the details that you can actually work with, can actually do. So a good deal of what I'm doing when I'm prepping is trying to keep that tight for the game that I'm running. Generally, if I'm prepping a bigger mystery, as I did recently with Delta Green, that's a couple of hours maybe worth of planning for a mystery that's going to last several sessions. But then when we actually get into play, I hold myself to my same limits, which is I do not prepare or plan for more than an hour for a particular individual session. I absolutely cut myself off at that. I won't start, doing the hard prep for a session until that hour mark. And that has really helped me focus what I do and really think hard about planning. Now, I'm going to talk about the steps that I go through when I plan a more traditional game, with the maybe a couple hours before kind of setting up the initial mystery and then the hour of planning. These are just my techniques. These are the things that have worked for me. So they may be useful for you, or you may find them not as good an approach. But I just want to stress that this is the workflow that I've come to. The first of these is, for me, if I'm going to go and put a mystery out in front of players, once I kind of got the incident and maybe some idea of here's where we start, here's where we're going to end, maybe that. The next thing that I almost always do is I build a timeline. I build a timeline like, here is where the crime happens. Here is where this person appears in this. Here is where the initial inciting incident is, and I'll make a very basic set of chronology. And that provides a scaffolding for me. It provides a set of structures, and then I go through and I can start to see where there are gaps. Like, okay, maybe there's a big gap in terms of time. What has occurred here? How did we get from this point to this point? Building up a chronology is a great starting point for two reasons. One, it helps you visualize the sequence of events. And you can go, okay, I kind of need to answer this question. Okay, where does that fall in the chronology? What was this person doing at this time? And the other thing is, when you actually get to the table, one of the things that players will hook onto to try and like figure out what's going on, to figure out what the story is they're going to try and build up that sequence of events. Okay, this person was killed. Okay, what were they doing before this? Okay, when did they learn about this? At what point did this person come into contact with them? That chronology works backwards for the players, for you figuring things out. It also sets the table for you to like go, okay, the mystery has occurred. The players have started to investigate the killing. If nothing else changes, what else is going to happen? Are there going to be other murders? Is this person going to escape? Like, what's the chronology? Is this demon going to get summoned? Like, what's the timetable for those things? And I'm not talking about like putting out huge amounts of details, but just getting yourself a rough chronology with a few statements on things. It's a good way to outline the backstory for the characters as well. Like, how did this person that's the victim, how did they get involved in this whole situation? So for me, that's my starting point, is the chronology and doing that timeline. Another approach, another way to look at kind of figuring out what is involved in the mystery is to focus on locations. And that's putting out a list of places. I will often do this is write down like the kinds of places it might be. If I've already kind of in my mind established like, okay, here's where the killing took place. Here's this person's house. Here's a bar they might have visited. I might sketch some details and names about those places, but I'll often also just make a list of places that could be set pieces. Just the act of making that list primes the pump for you later on when somebody asks about something, when they're asking a question that maybe isn't exactly sketched out in your notes. You have these places that you can go to, these places that you can call back to. That process is about visualizing. Again, I don't sketch out everything that can be found in a place, but I will like try to get a sense of who might be there and of how that might be important to figuring out the problem. Sort of number 3 on that after the timeline and locations, and that is key characters. What I recommend is that you have a set of characters that you've put some time in, the ones that have some backstory, that have some chronology to them, but you don't have too many of them. Back when I taught technical and business writing, one of the things they told us was that in terms of what people could absorb and work with at a time, it was 5 items plus or minus 2. So if you made a list that had deep information in it, you didn't want to have more than 7 items total at the most in those things. I do recommend you think about, and this is usually for me, 3 or 4 key characters that you want to spend a little bit of time figuring out their backstory. They're going to be hooked into the mystery and have them strongly in mind with names established. So timeline, locations, key characters, and then the other one are roles. And by this, I mean the kinds of characters that will typically pop up in a mystery, like here's a detective that they might run into to go and talk to somebody about the case, or here's a newspaper reporter, or here's a house cleaner who might have been near the scene, those kinds of things. Typically with roles, I'll put down a role and I'll put down a name, just because having that name readily at hand, it makes things so much easier. Like the place list, putting down some of those roles for the kinds of characters or archetypes or roles that might appear within your particular mystery helps you visualize, helps you have that in mind. Again, prime the pump for when you're at the table trying to figure things out, trying to connect things together. The last structure that I will use, and this is often deeper in the planning process, the prep process. After I've got a sense of the timeline, I maybe have a sense of the characters. That's the point at which I will look at building a relationship map. How does this character know this person? How does this person know this place? Those kinds of maps. I will say with relationship maps, the act of doing them, the act of building them is the best thing for me when I go to run. I don't usually refer to them when I'm actually at the table because I find that's very easy to kind of get lost in that. But it's a great practice to get into to develop those kinds of ideas and things that you could draw on once we get to playing. Do I have a favorite tool for drawing relationship maps? I think that's a reasonable question. I will honestly say that I actually use pen and paper for the relationship maps. I'm way too old school, and I find that much easier for me to work with is circles and lines for that. I know some people do use the kinds of relationship drawing tools and use them very well. Will H, for example, is a master at working with those kinds of things. And I know there's some other ones. And of course, Dan Brown, who's with us here, I'm going to hit him up with this question. Actually, Dan, is it Miro that you use generally for mind mapping, or do you have a better tool that you've been using for relationship maps?
No, Miro's pretty good, and I think that's what I've seen Will use that one
Okay.
a lot. I
And
think there's a free version.
okay. So that's definitely the one that I've seen most in use, and it's the one that seemed to be the most effective. But I will admit, for me, it's very much I have a lot of notebooks. I do most of my prep and planning in those. I've tried to get better at putting it in electronic format as I've been trying to do more voice to text work to make it easier. But I do like what the pen and paper allows me to do. Some other issues that I keep in mind when planning that are important is you need to think about what the chosen system that you're going with does for you, what it does both in terms of form, what it looks like what the information is getting doled out in what shape, and also the granularity of that. What can players ask? How can they ask that? Let me take an example. Masks, the teen superhero game, has some very discrete set of information gathering questions, and they're very much in the moment questions. They're very much, how do I figure this out? How do I get out of this situation? Things like that. That really shapes what players feel like they have permission to ask about. So you have to decide, am I going to modify those for more broad information gathering, or am I just going to hand wave and say, okay, when you go to investigate this, here is what you find out? Need to look at that. In terms of what the game wants, Monster of the Week is another example of a game that does a very distinct and different thing. It's very easy for people to approach Monster of the Week like a classic investigation game, and they think they have to kind of figure out the details and they want to solve the mystery and things like that. But Monster of the Week, there's a very specific mystery that you are trying to solve. How do I beat this monster? That's set out there. The structure of play revolves around that. And if you're thinking about it in a more general mystery approach, you're kind of missing what Monster of the Week brings as a strength to the table. On the other hand, there are games and systems that are much more discreet about what information you get. We're going to come back to talk about Gumshoe later on, but it's a game that really breaks down information into specific categories. It really says if you want to get particular kinds of information, you absolutely have to have skills that relate to that piece of information. And you need to think about that, about how the game gives you that, how it provides that information to players, what players have permission to ask when you're thinking about what kind of clues you can give. Because sometimes you may like set up a clue that would take some twists for the players to actually get to that or ask that question, given how the game is structured. So you need to have that in mind. Another thing to think about while planning, and again, this kind of refers to Gumshoe, is player-facing material. This is material that is documents or images or maps or anything that says it's coming from the game world itself. This is a great resource. Like this is very cool because you get to give a handout to the players and they can look at it and play with it. And that's very cool. But there are some real limitations to player-facing materials. Number one, longer sets of player-facing materials, as presented in the Dracula dossier, for example, from Nice Black Agents, it has a copy of Dracula with redacted notes and commentaries and marginalia in it. That is a serious investment for any player to actually look through and put together for to draw ideas from, to use it to go somewhere. Now, if everybody's on the same page, they've all agreed that we're going to be playing the Dracula dossier and we're going to be working from that and we're going to go through these materials, that's one thing. But if it's a smaller game or if the players are not ready for it, you need to be thinking about how we can tighten those things. There are other really great mystery modules, mystery campaigns that have big chunks of player-facing material they're really cool, but they have a lot of weight of expectations on the players. And what can happen if you give a bunch of player-facing material to the table is you may create a real break between players in the group. You may have some players that are really into it. They want to go through those documents. They want to look for details. They want to pull all that information out. And there are some players for whom that is not a fun activity. And the problem becomes then, you want to spend time with those players working out, those details, but then you get these other players sitting there while you're going through it. So my recommendation is, especially in online play, you keep those player-facing documents tight, like maybe a page, maybe 2 pages. Keep it as tight as possible so that nobody feels like it's a big job of homework to work through those things. If you are at home, face-to-face, working through things, I think you can probably do larger amounts of materials. You want to make sure that everybody has a copy, and you want to give that to the players at the end of the session. If you give players player-facing materials, they will immediately start to look at them. So recognize the timing of when you give players those handouts and things. If it's a little thing that they can look at in just a minute or two or a couple minutes, it's worth giving in play. But otherwise, saving those for end of the session is probably your better plan. One of the things that Gumshoe does that is a really good tool for planning and for visualizing your mystery is they break up clues into different types. And for me, there are two types that really are important. One of these is core clues. And the idea of a core clue is that in any scene that a player is in, or a group of players, there is at least one core clue that is going to point them to the next step. It's going to point them to the next information source. It's going to point them to the next place they need to go. It's going to point them to the next person they need to talk to. So there is always one clue that leads on. And in Gumshoe, this is the clue that they always get when they go into a scene. Like somebody's going to be able to use their skills to gain that clue and move on. The other clues may do other things. And for me, the idea of those is the other clues deepen our understanding of what's going on. They're giving us a better sense of maybe who the foe is. They give us a better sense of what the motivation is. They give us a better sense of what the means were. These are things that go on and help us so that when we get to the end, we have a better picture of what's happening. We know how to fight the villain. We know what the dangers are. We know what the risks are. I think that's a really good way to think about when you're kind of sketching out your mystery. This is what leads from X to Y to Z. And then here are the things it would be great if they knew by the end. Adapting existing mysteries. I am a relentless thief and plagiarist. I'm going to tell you that right now. I will steal from anything and everything that I have ever watched or read. I will reuse plots from TV shows that I've seen. I will adapt them and change them into other versions of things. And I recommend that you do the same. Because once you get them to the table and once you start playing them, they will be nigh unrecognizable for their original source. There is I don't want to say a terrible movie, but a not great movie called Lord of Illusions by Clive Barker from a number of years. It has Scott Bakula in it, and he has a really cool tattoo on his back. It's not a great movie, but it does have a really interesting plot about a cult and a magician and people trying to hide from this cult. And I stole that for a Call of Cthulhu scenario, reworked it, and it was great. It had lots of color to it. I had a nice bit of arc. It did not look at all like the original product, but there were some really, really fun hooks that I could steal. I also tend to steal by changing up modules that I've read. Like, I think Call of Cthulhu and Trail of Cthulhu have some great mysteries in them, but often they are either very much set in a particular location or a particular time, or they have too much going on. They are overwritten, they are bloated. So the way that I approach adapting mysteries, what I approach stealing is I go and I look at the mystery and I think, what is the thing that is attracting me? What is the thing when I read through this that is cool? And I steal that out. I will take that out. The Arkham Detective Stories is a Trail of Cthulhu mystery collection. It has this great, very deep, very laid in story about a poet who wrote a book, and they put their essence in the book, and now people are becoming the poet, but the different poet, like versions of them becoming the poet, are trying to kill one another. I have just taken that essential concept out and used that in two different scenarios in very different ways, because that central hook of an object that is turning people into somebody else and those somebody else's want to kill each other to gain power, that's a great hook. I will steal that for any scenario. I can use that in science fiction. I can use that in Delta Green. I can use that in fantasy. These are adaptable. Like if you are wondering about, you want inspiration for a mystery story, keep an eye out for any of those bundles of holding or humble bundles that have these kinds of stories, these kinds of collections. Skim through them. Look for, when you skim through a mystery, when you skim through a module, what are the things you remember from it? And what, when you first read the start of it, like what do you imagine is going to happen? I'll sometimes just read the start and then I'll write a mystery just based on what I figured would be the mystery coming up, and don't worry about reading the rest. But I'll also look for just the coolest stuff. It's easy. It's a great resource. Change genres, change details, change genders, change characters, rework them. It's one of the easiest resources that you have. So that's my very scattershot talk about planning. I'm going to take another drink and I want to talk about like when we actually get to the table. Now, this one, what I talk about now is going to apply for any kind of mystery that you're running. If you're running a mystery with a set plan, if you're running an improv mystery, if you're running Brindlewood Bay, these are things, I think, techniques that you want to keep in mind when you're doing this. Number one, it's really important during the sort of the CATS discussion or the preliminary setup discussion or even the event description for a mystery. If you're picturing this as a mystery game, as an investigation game, tell the players that. They should know that this is what this is going to be, and they should be on board. Because if it's going to be 100% investigation, 90% investigation, that's a very different game than your typical TTRPG. You want the player buy-in. You want them to be excited about that. So tell people if that's going to be the primary activity. If there's going to be particular genre considerations, like is this going to be noir? Is this going to be pulp? Are your characters going to be outsider investigators like monsters or whatever? You want to set those things up. I think really want to spell that out for the players during your CATs, during your setup. As early as possible, when you're starting a detective game, you want to model for the players what information gathering looks like. You want to show them that if they want to research something, this is the kind of role that they're going to do, and this is the kind of information that you're going to give them. And how much RP, how much role play do they need to do with that research? You want to model that process early for them. If they go to talk to somebody, do you say, I'm going to go talk to this person, and then you make a roll, and then you get this information? Or is there, as a GM, are you more comfortable doing a little bit of back and forth and then making a roll? Or are you just doing the back and forth talking? You need to model that structure for the players early on so they know, okay, when I go into a scene, these need to be my expectations. I want to go talk to this person, so I kind of need to think about what my relationship is going to be to them, what my position is, like how do I get this out of them versus I'm a detective, I go and make an interrogation roll. Players need to know that so that they can mentally plan what they're doing and go into a scene with a better sense of what they need to have as resources in terms of skills, in terms of mental preparation. Related to that, another thing that you need to make explicit or model early on is how information is shared. One of the things in a mystery game is often players are going in different directions. Tim is going to go out and investigate this. Robbie's going to go check on this. Dan's going to go check on this third thing. And we go through and we do those pieces of information. What I do is I establish early on that if Tim does his scene and finds out a piece of information, when we go to Robbie's scene, my assumption is going to be that Tim has passed that information on, that Robbie can now operate or ask those questions based on material that Tim has discovered and so on. It's not entirely realistic, especially if you're like in a fantasy game or whatever, but it does create a shortcut and make the passing of information much easier in play. In games where we have modern games where we have communications like cell phones and things like that, that's easier to justify. But even in games where those aren't present, I tend to say that that's how we're going to handle it, because otherwise there's a period of everybody gets together and they have to repeat what they've learned. And people don't know if they've heard something, if they haven't been told. Do I already know this? Do I have to ask? Do I do that? I think that's really important. Now, one thing I do also add in when I have people do that is I say, if you do want to keep something secret from somebody, you can say that. And that gives us an interesting plot point to play from. At the table, be obvious. It's very easy to overwrite and overcomplicate a mystery. It's very easy to do that. It's better to have for yourself a very clear line. Burying things like a needle in a haystack is very difficult for the players. It makes for a frustrating experience. Sometimes you'll feel like you're giving clues that seem to you a little on the nose, a little obvious. They may feel obvious to you because you know what's going on. And that's going to be a sort of a constant issue you're going to be dealing with as a GM when you run mysteries. You already know the solution. You already kind of know the pieces. You know what's going on. You really need to work to give lots of information to the players that they can work with. They don't have all the insight yet that you have. What that means too is you need to be restating things, repeating things, and resetting up details. When you move between scenes, when you move after a break, when you move between sessions, that's your opportunity to go, okay, so Puckett, Tim discovered this in the previous scene, so you were going here, so what are you looking into? Take those moments and opportunities to restate what's established, to get that on the table so that players have a strong sense of what has been discovered and what evidence they have. But also, especially after breaks and after like between sessions, when you come back, you also want to restate, it seems like last time you were thinking this. It seems like last time these were the lines of investigation you were considering. It looked like last time you were going to talk to X. State those at the beginning of sessions. Get that out there. As a GM, that you present a certain authority and you get people on the same page early on. And here's the cheat. Okay. This is where I'm going to show you what a manipulative bastard I can be. I will often restate what they learned last time and what plot points they were looking at, with a special emphasis to ones that I think are valuable. I will restate the ones that I think are important. And if there are things that I think are less important, or maybe they were going off track, when I restate the situation, those things get dropped out. It is a way that you can massage the distinction between things. When players go to investigate, to get a clue, one of the things that Gumshoe has taught us is when they go to investigate, they have the skills, they're going to get a clue. That's the sort of one of the big developments of Gumshoe, 10, 15 years ago when they created this. The way that works for us is when somebody goes to investigate, even if we've got like a PBTA game or things like that, if they go to investigate, they are going to get information. And if there's a role involved, even if they fail, they're going to get information, but it's going to be at a cost. And you should be thinking about those costs. Is that cost going to be to the reputation? Is getting this information going to cut off their access to somebody? Is it going to cost them resources? Is it going to take them time? Is the cost going to be in terms of their ego? You need to be thinking about that. People get clues if they go to investigate, but the cost is what changes. Witnesses will lie, but you should be very cautious about having your NPCs lie to your players. If players go and ask and talk to somebody, if you have them lying, that's a piece of misinformation, a red herring that's out there that can be confusing. So how do you get around that? Especially if you have a witness that you think is going to be dishonest or doesn't want to tell them or is going to be untruthful. If someone is lying to them, you as a GM need to signal that they lied. That can be through body language, but I like to do it a little more explicitly. Like sometimes I will say, oh, no, he says to you that he doesn't know anything about that. And if he's lying straight to your face, I'll put that out there. Now they've got to figure out why he's lying or figure out how to work around that. But you can also say, he tells you this, but he seems evasive. He starts to tell you this, but he cuts you off. You sense there's more to it, but he's not willing, or you sense that he's afraid. These are all signals, all things that add a little complexion, that you can add a little depth to that interaction without just outright lying and giving the players misinformation. One of the unglamorous parts of doing a mystery game for the players is eliminating possibilities. Players will go and they will have an idea, they will have a hypothesis, and they will go and investigate something, and they will realize that that hypothesis is wrong. That is tremendously unsexy for the players. It can sometimes feel to them like that didn't move it forward. It didn't get us new information. But in fact, as a GM, you should celebrate and reemphasize when a player has managed to eliminate a possibility or cleared a suspect. You should be like, that's great. So now you've realized that this can't be the case. Put your energy into giving affirmations there, making the players feel like that result is a real success for them. Sometimes when you're running a mystery game, you will hear a player say something and you're like, that's completely wrong. I have no idea how you got that. I have no idea why you're thinking that. I will admit that 20 years ago, my instinct would have been to laugh and go, haha, okay, I've got them. But in fact, I honestly think that you need to stop when you hear really blatant misinformation being given at the table. Stop and ask that player, now, you know that this is true. So are you lying when you say this? Or are you deliberately misinforming? Like checking in with them about why their character or they are saying X, Y, or Z. And they may be stating it wrong deliberately. That may be a character moment, maybe a thing that they are deliberately doing. But if not, you need to ask them how they came to that conclusion, why they've decided that this thing is true, and if it is based on a misinterpretation of something they've already established, then you need to correct them. It means a little more GM intrusion and table management than is often comfortable with in story games or indie games and stuff, but I think it's really important. If you let a bunch of misinformation sit in there, it will get spread, and when somebody finally does say, I think that's completely wrong, you haven't thought about this, it's just going to make people unhappy. It's going to spoil the play experience. So you want to handle that as early as possible. Let me talk about just a couple more things, and then I'm going to stop talking because we're almost at the hour here. One of the things that will sometimes happen when you're running is a character or a set of characters will go out and will set up to do different investigation pieces. And the first player to go will find out a piece of information that when you get to that second player, they're doing a sort of similar thing. They're actually looking into a similar thing. And we've got a situation where the information is kind of redundant. And one of my instincts often is to go, well, you know this, but you also know this, and find out this extra thing about it. That seems obvious. Like, okay, yes, you know, Bob found out this, but when we got to this, then Rich found out that, but also found this out. However, that can make that first player feel like, okay, what I did doesn't matter because they would have found this other piece of information out as well. I think the trick is there to see if you can shift the clues, can shift what that second person would have found out so they find out something distinct. The other option is when you come to that second person, when you come to Rich, you can say, hey, so you're going to do this. Bob has already found out this. So is that this line of investigation you still want to do, or do you want to change that? Give that opportunity for the players to recalibrate what they're doing. Last thing before I stop talking and let you ask questions here. This is especially true if you're playing a game like Star Trek or any game where there like is forensic examination or examination of evidence or looking into particular data or research. There is what we call the parrot problem, which is the player says to the GM, I'm going to do a scan of this. And then you tell the player the results of the scan, and then that player has to turn as a science officer and regurgitate that information to the rest of the group. So what are ways to get around this? If you type fast, one of the ways to do that is to send a message in chat just to that player. Just give them information there and tell them that. That's one way. And it's inefficient for me because I am not a fast typist. That's not very good, and it kind of breaks my flow of information. So what other options are? One is when they are asking that question, you try to look to see how you can put a spin for the player on it. Ask the player for input about the question, input about the results. Give them a personal stake in what's going on. Give them some details that maybe they don't want to express to the other players, or they have to figure out how they want to massage that information. Try to work it so that the answers that you give them, the players don't feel like they just have to like state it point blank to the other players. Mysteries will take longer than you think. You will picture that, okay, we can get this done in one session. It will not take one session. Things will expand to do it, especially if you have a chance for the players to get together and talk about things, to figure things out. Just mentally, when you're trying to calibrate and calculate how long something is going to take, imagine that it's going to take longer. I've been doing this for years and years, and I still cannot calculate that. A Trail of Cthulhu game that I went to run, I had planned out 3 mysteries for a 5-session game. We ended up getting through one mystery in 4 sessions, and they finished it on a high point at the end of that mystery. And I was like, okay, we don't need to do the 5th session, because there was no way I was going to do that 5th session and try to jam a mystery in. Number 2, sometimes when you're sitting there as a GM, the players will be asking you questions. They'll be trying to figure things out. They'll be trying to solve something. And you go, my God, why aren't they asking this? Why aren't they asking this question? This is the question that will break it open. This is the thing. The thing you should do when you get that feeling is think, okay, what don't they have? Why isn't this important to them? Why isn't that detail concerning to them? And think about how you can modify other clues or other scenes to point towards that. Rather than getting frustrated, take that as a moment like of opportunity to go, oh, okay, I see that something is wrong here, something is happening. How do I shift what's coming up to get to that? It's not their fault. They're working with the evidence that you've given them, and you clearly haven't given them enough. You haven't reinforced them. You haven't provided them a sense that X, Y, or Z is important, and you need to rethink of what you're doing there. So Robbie put an interesting note in the chat here, and now I'm going to open up to Q&A, to questions, things like that. Robbie puts another consideration: distinction, mystery story versus crime story. They are related but overlapping genres, but they have different endpoints, different ideas about the endpoint. Mysteries are focused on solving the crime, while crime stories are focused on the rippling effects of the crime. It's like the difference between CSI mystery and the wire crime. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's easier to plot and plan out a mystery story in some ways than it is a crime story, or at least to give the players the motivation. Like a crime story is often things like that you have to figure out how the character interactions are going to lead them in those directions. Where a mystery story, there's a real concrete kind of end goal. So, are there questions, topics, things you'd like for me to talk about here, or things you want to comment on? Advice for genre-specific mysteries: high fantasy versus Call of Cthulhu or Tales from the Loop. One of the things I think is to be cautious when you're doing a high fantasy mystery or any mystery that has a lot of wonder or magic or things like that, is to put too much magic in, to put too much wildness in. I tend to make mysteries when they're in a fantasy setting as concrete as possible, real human motivations, real obvious things that can be discovered concrete, because magic is often hard to plan around and figure out, and especially not have too much of what's happening based on knowing the details of the setting too strongly. Like, I love Legend of the Five Rings, and I think some of the best work in Legend of the Five Rings is the early modules like City of Lies and some things, great mysteries. But sometimes I read those and I'm like, the solution that you're offering here is based on a very specific knowledge of this Rokugani setting and what's going on in this place. Some of the mysteries aren't, but sometimes you're like, okay, now I have to explain a bunch of other stuff for the players to be able to solve this. I think really, in most cases, focusing in on the real human elements is a better than not. You mentioned Tales from the Loop. Tales of the Loop is a really interesting case because the characters in Tales from the Loop don't have any power. So you've got a set of investigators that are trying to figure something out, but it's a real challenge for them. And that's actually a lot of the play, is in how the kids overcome that. And that means that when I run a Tales from the Loop mystery, the mysteries aren't that hard, because a lot of the challenge in play is about them saying, okay, I have to sneak out after night and go and do this. And so you look at where the play space is in that. Do you have an example of how you handle when players failed the crafted from Brindlewood theorized roll? Yes, i.e. they get it wrong. Do they get it right, but the criminal gets away? Do the police get the wrong person? Do they gather more clues and try it again? So one of the things about the theorized move is that I really do picture it as an endpoint. And the couple of times when I've had players fail, we had one of two things has happened. One is that the bad guy gets away. Like, they realize after that, like, they make the theorize, they solution, they present their hypothesis, but by the time they do that, A, they were wrong, and that let the bad guy get away, and B, the bad guy escaped. So I think that's a cost or a consequence. The one time when I think I really did it the best was they did the theorize move, they failed it quite badly, and somebody shot the person they accused because they wanted revenge. And it was only after that person was shot that the players realized that, in fact, the person they accused wasn't the criminal, and that they had been kind of set up. They had been manipulated. I think go hard on that, especially if this isn't the last mystery that you're going to do, because then you can bring those characters back. The bad guy that got away, the villain that escaped, the person that escaped punishment, you can bring them back in a later mystery, and the players have a real incentive to take that person down. If it's like the last mystery in the series, I might force a rethinking, put some costs on the table, like costs of their personal reputation or their ego or not, before allowing a second bite of the apple. Apocalypse Keys from Ray Najati. Ray has some really interesting discussion about how that failed theorized role works. It's handled differently in Apocalypse Cubes, but that's a resource that I would recommend for that. How do you handle it if a player theorizes, investigates, suggests a better, more interesting solution? If I'm playing a more semi-improv game, and we are doing a little more collaborative, we are doing a little more flexible, then I'm more than willing to start leaning towards that solution, bringing it in. If it's more of a set game where I've already put a lot of details in there and I'm worried that doing that shift, like I might start to bring down my architecture, I will say, and I've done this many times, oh my God, that is a much better solution than I had. That's great. I wish I had thought of that, because it affirms the player's imagination, but it also like points them in a particular direction, like, okay, this isn't what it is. So that is something that I will sometimes do. Any other questions? Dan?
Well, I'm thinking about, I mean, all the techniques that you've described sort of can take the kind of tone of the table in lots of different directions. And I know what I like, but I also want to know, how do you gauge what players are interested in, maybe even if they don't have a lot of experience engaging in mysteries? How do you gauge what their interests are? For example, when we play a mystery game, like, I'm not really interested in the mystery itself. I'm always more interested in character development and things like that. But are there questions that you ask folks in that session 0 to kind of help shape the direction that you want to take?
Yeah, one of the things I've done more recently, and whenever I do it, I forget to do it sometimes, but whenever I do it, I'm much more pleased, is I've done in that session 0 a themes, ideas, things we'd like to see set of questions, and do a go around on that. It's like the palette from Microscope, and things we'd rather not see. Each time I remember to do that, I'm like, oh, I need to remember to do this next time, and then I forget. I think that's a really good way to gauge that. And the other thing is looking at what they've chosen for their character playbook, and maybe like asking them, what kind of detective are you? Like, how do you investigate? What is your character all about? Those kinds of follow-up questions when they're introducing themselves is another good way to do that. And the first time you do a go around and say, okay, what do you want to go and look into? That's it. That's another key aspect of a learning point as well. Any suggestions on balancing combat with big bad that's just part of concluding mysteries, or the players are tasked with taking them into custody, taking them down? That's a really good question. One of the things is that some games are about taking the bad guy down, taking the villain down. Monster of the Week. Monster of the Week is almost always about the third act. We're going to take the bad guy down. Call of Cthulhu and Delta Green are interesting because there are very different genres of that. If you're doing like a pulp Call of Cthulhu, then that third act is, we're going to have a big fight. Somebody's got dynamite. Somebody's got a submachine gun. That's part of the set dressing, the set pieces that are there. And you want to give space. Look at how many of your players have bought combat skills. How much prep have they done for fighting? If they've invested in that, you want to pay off that investment. If that is something that players have spent points on or bought moves for, whatever, give it to them. You want to have that. Delta Green's an interesting case because for me, Delta Green is perverse in that sometimes you're in a really bad position, and sometimes you pull away from the players that opportunity to actually get that closure through fighting. Throughout that Delta Green campaign that I ran, that quarterly campaign I ran last time, there were a couple of times where they would have loved to like actually get a hold of somebody. They would have loved to like get the bad person, but that got yanked away from them, which is part of the tone and feel. When we got to the final session, they got the big fight, and half of them died. And that was that last session was all about them raiding a base and combat and death and things like that. And that was the payoff for all of that setup from earlier. I think look at what the players have bought into and how they're feeling. Get, read the room, read the temperature of it. If they are like, we really got to take this person down, we've got to do it and with some finality, we got to take the big bad out. I want to thank you all for putting up with me today here for this 80 minutes of talk. I've written out some examples of how I've structured mysteries in the past. So I think there are a lot of great mystery games out there. It's one of my favorite things. And thank you all so much.